Those are a lot of scars.
I don't understand how I got here.
You must be so alone.
I read books.
Are you all right? Don't try any funny business.
We are talking about the movie Depraved. This one is directed by Larry Fessenden, and who also wrote this. Larry Fessenden directed a movie called Beneath, which was quite a fun water-based creature feature that I have watched some time ago. And it stars David Cole, Joshua Leonard, and Alex Breaux. So this essentially is a modern-day retelling of Frankenstein, just not called Frankenstein on the cover there. So set in obviously a contemporary sort of time zone. It follows this guy who is murdered after kind of having a little bit of a disagreement with his girlfriend and walking home. And then we kind of, through quite a clever kind of like visual effects sequence, we see him waking up in the body of a stitched up person, a different person who has gone through some severe trauma, and obviously, you know, he's conscious now. He's now in this Frankenstein body, so to speak, and it's essentially him trying to come to terms with what happens. Kind of, he's really like in a somewhat vegetative state initially, and it's him kind of learning the basic cognitive skills, learning how to kind of speak again, that sort of thing, basic functions, and his interactions ultimately with the kind of like the guy who brought him back, this guy called Henry, and then kind of with other people as well that he's kind of introduced to, starting to slowly piece together maybe what's happened, and that leads to sad and tragic and violent conclusions here. So let's talk a little bit about Depraved. So this is a mature and slow-paced kind of version of Frankenstein. And I've got to say, I think this is a very confidently made film. The movie is slow-paced, but I do not feel it ever gets boring. I feel the performances here all are layered and interesting. So the movie kind of holds up a mirror to society and kind of says, who's the real monster here? Very much like the kind of the Frankenstein original kind of novel. You know, is it the actual quote-unquote monster or humanity itself? And we see different facets of negative behaviour from kind of humanity throughout the movie. So I think the movie tells the story in a kind of an assured pace, really, despite the fact that it is, you know, somewhat of a kind of slower moving film. I kind of don't want to call this a horror film per se. It's more of a kind of, I guess you would call it a horror drama than anything. Because there are some elements of death here and obviously resurrection. So I put it under the banner of horror, but this is really more of a dramatic movie rather than like a kind of a horror film, so to speak. I really enjoyed the way the movie incorporates VFX. So quite often we'll see like graphics of kind of like synapses firing up and things like this. Now they're kind of like obviously CGI sort of overlays over the picture. And normally I don't like things like this, but for this movie I felt like it really kind of works because it's kind of showing you that Adam, who is our monster for this movie, and we'll come on to that name in just a second, is kind of like, he's learning, and we're getting the idea, obviously, that his kind of brain, so to speak, his brain cells are kind of like firing up, and it does other things, like a fogginess in certain things, and so I feel like kind of the overlay of these kind of visual effects works really well with this film, and kind of gives you a much more of a kind of a POV from Adam, aka the monster's kind of like point of view, and kind of allows you to kind of step into his shoes and kind of, you know, realise he is kind of either learning or he's kind of like struggling with certain things. And there's an instance where he gets inebriated, and it's kind of, again, it just kind of adds to that kind of like that confusion to put you in the kind of like the mind frame of this character, which I thought was very, very good. I feel the story is pretty interesting. Like I said, it's more or less a kind of retelling of Frankenstein, but it is updated And it's not an exact story. There are a few kind of like differences here and there. Certainly updated for a modern audience and different enough to kind of stand on its own. I mean, there have been obviously a variety of kind of like interpretations of the kind of the Frankenstein story. And I think it's just actually one of the strongest ones, certainly of kind of modern era within the kind of the last kind of like 20 years or so, I would argue, even though this is technically speaking not called Frankenstein. Although they do reference that in this movie, and I'll come on to that again in just a second. The makeups themselves of Adam, now, like I said, I'll mention the name Adam. Adam, when we see Frankenstein referred to it, either the book or the, obviously films and things like that, obviously that's the whole thing, people getting it mixed up with Frankenstein, the doctor versus the monster. But the monster is called Adam in the book. But people always never seem to kind of reference that. So in the actual original Mary Shelley book, the monster name is Adam, and obviously this character's name is Adam. So Adam has always been the name of Frankenstein's monster. So yeah, I thought the actual prosthetics that, you know, as the movie goes along, we kind of see them kind of heal up a little bit more, and his kind of hair growing back, as goes obviously to show kind of the passage of time. I thought that was all a good effect. We do see kind of flashback sequence of the kind of the operation to kind of like sew him up together, which is pretty gory, although it's through kind of, he's looking through a camera, so you don't see it. It's fairly grainy, but it's done to a good effect. So what doesn't work with this movie? One minor little nitpick, first of all, that I kind of want to say. The movie actually references Frankenstein towards the end of the movie, and someone says to stuff, "Oh, I'm your Igor." Now, it bothered me the fact that in this, if we're watching this kind of film, and they are referencing Frankenstein, surely this would have been brought up before, not just kind of like mentioned as a throwaway line right at the last thing. But it's obviously so much kind of like, the story's so much like Frankenstein, surely people would be referencing it in kind of day-to-day conversations with themselves. So we're led to believe in this world that this movie inhabits, there's clearly the book, probably movies and stuff, and if people are doing this, and obviously they're calling the guy Adam as well, I don't know, to me I think they would have just been better to completely drop off the reference, or lead into it a little bit more and kind of be a bit more self-referential. As it stands at the moment, it's a throwaway comment, and I feel that that kind of almost, because we know that the characters are aware of the Frankenstein story at this point, it kind of makes it seem a little bit odd that they wouldn't have mentioned it before. But that is a nitpick, I appreciate that. But do I have any kind of more kind of real criticisms? I do, and the thing to me, this is going to, one of them is going to involve a little bit of a spoiler here. I do feel that this movie should have shown a little bit more of some certain things that I thought were a little bit missing in the story. Now, the movie is a relatively slow-paced movie, as I've said. I do feel that some scenes could have been replaced. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more about how he was brought back to life. I mean, in the kind of the old-style kind of movies, the Universal monster stuff, obviously we kind of see them putting up in the lightning and all of that, and obviously today we want more of a kind of a scientific, realistic method, but we don't really see it. I mean, we're just told that there's this drug, but that's it, you know. I would have liked to have gone to a little bit more understanding about how this has happened, because I've got to be honest with you, that when we see the kind of the lab, it all seems a little bit slapdash, and you can't, it's hard to imagine that this sort of scientific breakthrough has come through in this kind of like someone's loft, with no real explanation about how they have brought the dead back to kind of life. So it bothered me a little bit that kind of was missing. And this next thing is going to be a little bit of a spoilery comment. I'll try and be as vague as I can, but I have to kind of address it. Another thing I felt was missing from this movie is, at the beginning of the movie, the character that becomes Adam is called Alex, and he is murdered. And we see the kind of the murder. It's a brutal murder. It's very kind of like it seems initially like it's like some sort of random knife attack. But when it's revealed who that is, and the person who has done that, the person who has done it seems to have absolutely no remorse, and it's just like stealing a bar of chocolate from the shop. There doesn't seem to have any type of mental effect that it's had on this person. And this person is not depicted to be like a psychopath or a serial killer or anything like that. And I felt it kind of, again, it just took away the how is this affected. I understand the motivations why he's done it, for the kind of the reasons. Again, trying to not be specific with story points here, but to me, there was absolutely no struggle at all. It was just like a matter-of-fact thing to do. And it just seemed a little bit realistic, because someone to be that blasé about it would have to have had some type of serious psychological issues, and that again is just kind of glossed over. So that just, I mean, there's a couple of instances where things for me with this movie, I felt it needed to have a little bit more context within the film. So as it stands at the moment, I feel the movie is pretty solid. But I feel there are some circumstances, like the two I've mentioned, there's a couple of other things as well, but I don't want to go into too many story points here, where the movie just needed to kind of have a little bit more context in the kind of what it was showing you, because I feel it was a little bit too ambiguous with certain things, and we just have to kind of accept it. But when you kind of sit and think about it, you're kind of thinking, maybe that kind of doesn't quite is enough for me. But overall, that aside, what we do have on screen is still an enjoyable film, a modern retake on the kind of the Frankenstein mythos without being called Frankenstein, and certainly a well-made and well-acted film with some neat directorial flourishes. I would enjoy this one. I would recommend this one for the most part. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.